Hello, everyone. Today I have the pleasure of speaking with Dr. Christopher Gardner. He's a professor of medicine at Stanford University and director of nutrition studies at the Stanford Prevention Research Center. He's also a renowned nutrition researcher and a prolific author, having penned multiple books and some 244 articles about the foods we eat and the impact of those choices. I'm very excited to spend some quality time with a true expert exploring the truth and misconceptions about the foods we eat. Dr. Gardner, welcome to the Ecoflix podcast.
I'm pretty excited about being here, David.
Awesome. So let's just jump right in. I'm going to go with the low-hanging fruit, a little metaphor for this topic.
Or vegetable, low-hanging vegetables sometimes catches people's attention. Really?
Okay. I like that. I like that. So can you start by eliminating, if you will, the really obvious myths that irk you about public misconceptions about food?
Oh, sure. Well, the broadest one is that all nutrition is confusing and no nutrition scientists agree. And I have to say that my perspective comes from a pretty well-founded place. I helped the diabetes group with their guidelines that came out in 2019. I'm chair of the American Heart Association's Nutrition Committee. I currently serve on the Dietary Guidelines Advisory Committee. I've worked on the guidelines for the Culinary Institute of America's Menus of Change. It's pretty stunning that when you get in a room of scientists and you look at the data, there might be some personal differences, but when we look at the data, say, yeah, we know that, and the other stuff we don't really know. And so probably we can say this and we can't say that. It's quite amazing how much consensus there is, and it blows me away that there's another nutrition headline. They said, now they just said everything we knew for the last 50 years is wrong. They changed their minds again.
Well, of course, you have to understand, most of us got our misconceptions about food from our mother, who ordered us to clean our plate, and I had to eat tongue before I could go out for Halloween and all kinds of things. So I love your concept of stealth nutrition. Can you explain that a little bit?
Yeah, this came after many, many years of feeling that I had exceeded all my personal expectations. So David, in 1981, I graduated from Colgate University with a philosophy major, and I was a bum for 6 years afterwards, because what do you do with a philosophy major other than be a barista and a waiter? And I was. And by mistake, I ended up getting a PhD in a faculty position. I really, at one point, only wanted to have a vegetarian restaurant, but by mistake, all these things happened. And all of a sudden, I was publishing in medical journals. I was presenting at medical conferences, and I was saying, yes, we found this, do it. And people would look at me and say, why? That's not my culture, and I don't cook much, and I'm not sure I like the taste of that. And I thought, wow, I really thought once I got to this place in the ivory tower that there would be some power and impact here. But a really formative experience I had was applying for a grant years ago, where the objective was, from the NIH, find novel ways to approach young adults who feel impervious and try to prevent the gain of weight instead of having to deal with people losing weight they already gained. And they wanted something novel. And a colleague and I, Tom Robinson, said, well, how about social responsibility and engagement? Instead of talking about food, let's talk about the external social issues that come up with food. And that had to do with animal rights and welfare, global warming and climate change, human labor abuses in slaughterhouses and agricultural fields, and fast food situations. And we actually published a paper on this in 2010. We got 3 of my colleagues to give a survey to their students in their class, and we gave a pre and a post survey in our class, where we agreed to never talk about health, only to talk about things external and related to health. And it was career changing for me. The students in this class, they were reading Michael Pollan's Omnivore's Dilemma, Barbara Kingsolver's Animal Vegetable Miracle, Eric Schlosser's Fast Food Nation, Marion Nestle's Food Politics, Jonathan Safran Foer's Eating Animals. And they said, oh my God, I've sent the books home to my parents. I'm trying to get my brother to change. My roommate wants me to stop talking about it, because every time I come back from class, I'm talking about it, and they're irritated and annoyed that I can't stop discussing it. when we listened to the things that they were doing, they were making all the changes personally that we had hoped they would make due to a rational explanation about health for these non-health reasons. They all kind of aligned with a more plant-based diet, more whole foods, less fast food, less industrial meat, less industrial processed food. And it's like, oh my God, I've been doing the wrong thing. And so this idea of calling this stealth nutrition really meant sort of not talking about health and nutrition directly. But I do want to point out it wasn't stealth in the form of deceit. It wasn't like we were deceiving them. How many of you know a mother who said, I made cauliflower and broccoli and I blenderized it and stuck it in this thing so my kids didn't know it was there? That, to me, I understand why they're doing it, but that's a little deceitful. So for me, stealth nutrition is really just taking another angle that's food related. And if somebody isn't moved by a health argument, are they moved by animal rights and welfare? If not, how about climate change? If not, how about human labor? If not, how about water issues? And finding that, having that tool chest of ideas until you hook them. I found maybe not the sweet spot, but the savory spot that's got your attention,
But
work with that.
the part that got me from this discussion earlier, when we talked about it the other day, is the idea that the food just has to be unapologetically delicious.
Oh, so that was my next epiphany. Okay, so while I'm doing this and I'm finding sort of new partners to work with, I got approached by Walter Willett and some folks at the Harvard School of Public Health who have had a long relationship with the Culinary Institute of America. I like to joke now that I'm on the scientific advisory board of the CIA, but this CIA is the Culinary Institute of America. Anyway, about a little more than 10 years ago, they got together because the chefs that they're training at the CIA were very frustrated that they were overly reactive. So their patrons and clients one day wanted paleo, then they wanted gluten-free, then they wanted keto, then they wanted vegan. And they said, since we're the chefs, could we start getting ahead of this so we don't have to buy new equipment and change our menus? So they got a scientific board, a business board, and a chef board. And they wanted to find the area that overlapped all of those and said, all right, instead of us being at the whim of those folks, let's find some nutrition principles that won't change. And let's use business practice that will be sustainable and will get people coming in and paying for their meals. And it will let us as chefs create and do what we love to do. And one of the heads of that was a guy named Greg Drescher at the Culinary Institute of America, who first started using the word craveability, which I really liked. But then he started using unapologetic deliciousness, which they use to this day. And it had a special meaning for me, David, because I had done studies to do things like show how fiber helps lower your cholesterol. And I can sort of remember thinking, I've done an NIH study. I have some cardboard here. It doesn't really taste good, but mechanistically, I could explain why this would help your health. And I could just picture my face scrunching up in an apologetic way. Like, I'm sorry that I'm asking you to eat the thing you don't want. I'm asking you to eat the thing you don't want to eat because of this health reason. And he said, why are you doing that? We make everything taste delicious. It could be unapologetically delicious, and you could lead with that instead of your apologies, which has sprung up over the years. I bet this will resonate with a lot of people. In the US, we have dissociated health and taste. If you say, hey, would you like the healthy option? They say, no, I want the tasty option. Wait, what? Do you want the option that's tasty and healthy? Oh no, those don't exist. Yes, they do.
Right. And so that counters the narrative that food has to be bland and boring and tasteless or unexciting to be healthy. And that does call on the chefs to be a little more creative, because there's just so much that most of us can do with carrots and vegetables in general. So let's talk a little bit more about what it means to eat healthy, because there is this big debate. One diet is better than the other. You can't be healthy if you're on keto because you're, all protein and no carbs or whatever. So what's your big picture thought on that? I know you've done a study. I want to ask you a couple studies, but just big picture first. I want to get your thoughts.
Yeah, there isn't one diet for everyone. If you look at the cultures around the world, one of the things that I learned years ago during my doctoral work was that there were the Inuits up in the Arctic, and there were the Maasai in Africa who were eating a lot of animal products,
And
and they were
blood.
super healthy.
Eating.
Yeah. And then there were the Tarahumara Indians in Mexico who are world-renowned marathon runners. They like take cutoffs of car tires and slap them around their feet with rawhide, and they're world-class ultra marathoners. All they eat is corn and beans all day, almost no fat and almost no meat. So human beings are insanely resilient and can adapt to almost any diet as long as it's sort of the seasonal, local diet of foods and not a bunch of the industrial stuff that
Well,
we've handed.
but that gets to probably the heart of the problem. We are, as a society, certainly first world, eating buttery, sugary products that we crave. And obviously, there's a psychological component. Once you start craving them, it's even harder to stop.
Yeah.
But what's the big picture? What do you want people to know about binge eating those foods? Um, should we never eat them? Should we
Oh,
try to eat
no.
them in moderation? What's the trick?
Okay, so don't never eat them. That just doesn't work. So you need to have some joy and pleasure. You need to go rogue once in a while. It's someone's birthday. It's a celebration. Just go off the deep end and have some fun. You're traveling. There's some culture that eats different than you. You won't be there again next week. Eat it. Try it. Moderation tends to backfire. I'm going to have the sugar in moderation. I'm going to have the cake in moderation. I have the cookie in moderation. And all the moderating was done with crappy food. So it wasn't really very moderate. The big take home I got was from a paper published in the Journal of American Medical Association in 2019. For listeners who don't know this, and probably you, David, there's been a van or multiple vans roaming around the US all year long and randomly picking people and assessing their health and their diet. And it's part of the National Health and Nutrition Examination Survey. It's called NHANES. And it's a great resource of data, and we have it for every year. And so there's some great publications where they sort of summarize what America was eating in 2000, 2005, 10, 15, and on. They summarize the proportion of calories coming from fats, carbs, and proteins. That's where we get all our calories other than alcohol is the only other contributor. And most people don't consume a lot, though some people consume too much. If you looked at those categories, it was really nice how they broke it down into different types of fats. There's mono and poly and saturated fats. And if you looked over a period of 20 years, there's very little change. Americans eat about 10% of their calories from each one of those, so that's 30. Then they looked at protein.
What are examples of the three, mono, poly, etc.?
Sure. Okay, so a lot of nuts have polyunsaturated fat. Sunflower oil is polyunsaturated. Avocados are monounsaturated. There's a couple of nuts. Gonna blank here. Is it almonds that are mostly monounsaturated? And saturated is anything animal-based for one. So it would be butter or pork or beef. But there's also some plant-based saturated fats. So anything tropical, coconut, palm are also saturated fats. But when you get down to it, basically all fats in food are combinations of saturated mono and poly. You won't ever find anything that's only saturated, only mono, or only poly. They've always got all three, but the one that's the most, like olive oil, is mostly mono. Coconut is mostly saturated. I think walnuts are mostly poly, and so we call them polys and monos and saturated, but it really is a mix. So then they looked at the easiest way to divide proteins are into animal and plant proteins. And I'd love to talk about my protein rant later, but put in the parking garage for now.
Okay.
Americans eat so consistently, it's almost amazing, about 18% of their calories from protein. It might go from 16 to 20, but it's usually about 18, and about 10 or 11 of that is animal, and about 6 or 7 of that is plant. And then it looks at the carbohydrates. So if I just talked about 30% from fat and about 20% from protein, there's 50% of calories left. And in this particular publication, they point out high quality versus low quality. And high quality carbs would be legumes and vegetables and beans and whole intact grains and fruits. And low quality carbohydrates would be sugars and refined grains and sweeteners. And so the aha moment here is of the 50% of our calories that are from carbs, 10 are good quality carbs and 40 are crap. 40% of our calories. And I tell you why this is super meaningful to me, because really the best advice you could give is to wipe out as much of that 40% of crappy carbs as you could. And if you did, what would you replace it with? If you were going to be a low-fat vegan, you might replace it all with high quality carbs, which would be pretty challenging. That's pretty bulky food, but maybe you could get quite a bit of the way there. If you wanted to be keto, you'd replace all those crappy carbs with fats.
Well, let's repeat. What are the 40% that people want, so it's clear in their minds that they want to eliminate?
It's sugar, it's white bread, it's candy, it's pizza crust, it's bagels that are made with refined grain. It's all the sugar that gets added in foods. The food industry is fantastic at one point, things were full of sugar, and then they realized that high fructose corn sweetener was cheaper than sugar. And so Americans love to have a sweet palate. So there's high fructose corn syrup, or if you really looked hard, if you've ever Googled a list like this, maltose, dextrose, evaporated, concentrated fruit juice, something or other. There's like 20 different names for sugar.
Yeah.
If you look at a label for, let's see how many of the listeners know this, you're supposed to list the ingredient of the greatest weight contribution first, and then second and third, and so on. And so quite often you'll see a grain or something else, and something like fifth or sixth down the row, there'll be sugar. So, oh, this is heartwarming. It's not one of the top ingredients. But then you find out sugar is also the 7th and the 9th and the 11th ingredient, the 17th. And in the end, it was second after you add up the 6 different ways they added it, but it's not in the top 6 because they split it up.
So how do you explain the fact that there are people, I hate them, that don't really like sugary treats? They aren't interested in overeating. They literally stop when they're full. What a concept. Who knew? And the same thing with sugary stuff. I mean, they don't let it touch their lips because they just don't want it. What's that about?
So you can, so there's a fun sugar challenge that you could do. And even people who are addicted to sugar, and there are a lot of people who are addicted to sugar, if you do this 7-day challenge and don't have any sugar at all, you will find pretty quickly that you don't miss it. What happens is, if you then say, wow, that was easier than I thought. I really thought that was going to, the first couple of days were horrible, but after that I did fine. And yeah, I guess I don't need as much. And so I think I'll just have one cookie. As soon as they have one cookie, they say, well, maybe just 2 cookies. Well, maybe just, and then it comes back with a vengeance. So almost anybody can do a good job of cutting back on sugar quickly. The challenge is maintaining it. And David, I do think that there's some genetic gift or something. Yes, there are some people who just aren't interested in sweets, but it is not the majority for sure.
No, it's certainly not, but I know several, and it's irritating beyond belief because it feels to me like it's a superpower.
Maybe you can get a blood transfusion from them.
Well, maybe a brain transfusion, but that's another story.
Okay.
So let's talk about your course on food and society. We don't get to attend your class. Can you give us an overview of what people come away with after you filled their head full of legumes and other details?
Yeah, so the fun part of it is that class is all discussion based. So we come up with readings for the students. We limit it to 15 or 20 students, upperclassmen in our undergraduate Stanford students. And I'll say, look, here's a couple controversial papers with different opinions, some books, some readings, some popular press. And here's if you really want to know the nuts and bolts, we've kind of got it down to a system. I give the readings out and I pick 2 student leaders, and they have to write up a post that they share with the whole class that's really no more than a paragraph long of something that really engaged them or was a real aha moment for them. They ask everyone else in the class over the next 2 days to comment on one of the discussion leaders' posts. And then we have a class discussion, and the leaders pick from all their fellow students' comments and say, oh, I saw some themes in your comments. And here's the theme I saw. And I saw 2 of the students disagree. And one of the assignments that you have to respond to in your post is you have to include an outside reading beyond what I provided. And so this is cheating of me, but I crowdsource readings from this because I don't have time to read it all. And so in this way, every student brings a new reading into the class, and every year they add more information to this thing that we discuss. It's very respectful. We encourage tension. We encourage vulnerability. We say this is a safe place to talk, but are you uncomfortable? And if so, that's probably productive about sugar, about meat, about organic, about GMO, about some of these things that people argue about.
Right.
What would it take to get to the core of this issue? And pretty much in every class, I say, just so you know, we're not going to answer any of these questions. Be in an academic course for 10 weeks, and we're not answering any of them.
So you're not going to tell us which diet to use, right?
We're not, yeah. What you're going to do is you're going to get more comfortable with discussing the different points and how they balance one another, and how that for a different person who has different priorities, they would pick different priorities than you do, and that's okay.
Yeah. And you're now a bit of a movie star because You Are What You Eat, available to the public, also on Ecoflix. Can you tell us a little bit about it?
Sure. So part of what I'd love to share is the process, if you want to hear that. But I'll tell you the documentary has a thread through the whole 4-part series of a study we did with 22 pairs of identical twins, where one twin was randomized to go vegan and one stay omnivore for 8 weeks. And the way the study was designed, for the first 4 weeks of the study, food was delivered to you. And nobody getting into the study was vegan, and nobody was sick. So these are generally healthy adults who are interested in science and willing to eat either one. And 4 weeks of food delivery, 4 weeks on your own. We have blood, we have poop for the microbiome. We have bodily fluids, we have survey questions. And the whole point was to see, so most of my studies are based on cardiometabolic outcomes, which means blood cholesterol, blood pressure, insulin, glucose, things like that. So we were measuring them all to see if 8 weeks we could make a difference in any of those things. Not just a vegan and an omnivore diet, the omnivore being the control, like what most Americans eat. But we made sure that it was a healthy vegan and a healthy omnivorous diet. So this is a personal pet peeve of mine, is colleagues who go out there and say, I have a favorite diet and I'm going to compare it to something. And I designed the comparison to be crappy, and I designed mine to be awesome, and it won. My diet is the best. And then the next week you see somebody else who liked the other diet better, and they made that one good and this one crappy. And they said, look how controversial this is. This week, the other one won. And my take is there'd be less controversy. We made them both good. So there's what's called a healthy eating index score, David. And the omnivores, the ones who got assigned to be omnivores in the study, the quality of their diet improved from before the study to being in the study. And the vegans did too, but in different ways because they were eating no animal products whatsoever. And that was the design.
Counterintuitive.
Yeah.
So you personally follow a self-described plant-based diet. Can you explain what that means in comparison to so-called vegan diets or vegetarian diets or
Yeah.
starvation diets?
And part of the way I describe it is just because of the recognition over 30 years of how negative and polarizing something like vegan is. So it can be, in certain people's hands, a very shaming diet. Ugh, you immoral, horrible person. I can't believe you don't eat what I eat because I eat something that makes me better than you.
Hmm.
That doesn't include many people under the tent, and that's just hard. Plant-based diet, in my mind, means most of what you eat are plants. And it doesn't mean you have to completely avoid all animal products. It would be pretty silly to think that if you, just to couch it in these terms, let's say you ate 18, 19, 20, 21 vegan meals a week, or wait, take away the 21, 18, 19, 20, and one meal a week wasn't vegan. So that meant you're not vegan. And so how could that person really be any healthier than
Well,
somebody with 21 meals a week?
but you know this, a lot of people who are vegan are doing it principally for health. They're doing it because they don't want to eat animals that were killed to feed them.
And some of them eat a lot of added sugar and a lot of refined grain, and
Yeah.
they don't eat healthfully. They're actually not very good spokespeople when you see that they're thin or emaciated, or they actually don't look very good.
Right. But you're talking about a different reason for their diet. They're eating it
Yeah.
because they want to avoid anything that had to die so they could eat. And plants, somehow people don't think are the same. If you kill a plant so you can eat, that's somehow quite a bit different. So they're okay with that.
I'm also a little concerned that in adolescence, we often have some young folks who actually have disordered eating. And one of the ways that they support that is they go home and say, Mom, Dad, I'm vegan. Can't eat this and I can't eat that and I can't eat the other thing. And they're really not eating a healthful diet. It's just it's part of what they're using to avoid eating enough food and enough variety in food. So there's negative connotations to this for sure.
Right, but I mean, I know from just the example I gave you of being forced to eat tongue when I just didn't want to. And truly it wasn't the taste, it was the imagery.
Uh-huh.
And the same is true with a lot of foods. You know, you go to England and you have blood, sausage or whatever. There are a lot of foods that are much more in your face about the fact that they come from an animal. And that's, I think, a legitimate basis to not want to eat certain foods. But again, the militant vegan is, part of the problem that some people have with veganism. And I get exactly what you're saying. Now you have studies, your most often cited studies are A to Z and Diet Fits, their weight loss diet trials. Can you tell us the major takeaways and important lessons we can learn from those rather substantial works?
Yeah, the A to Z study was 311 women for a year. The Diet Fits was 600 men and women for a year. A to Z had 4 diets: Atkins, Zone, a traditional health professionals diet, and Ornish. That's a huge spectrum of very low carb to kind of low carb to standard to very low fat. Diet Fits was only low carb and low fat. And Diet Fits was, of course, sort of built on the shoulders of A to Z. I'll just start there. We found very small differences at the end of 12 months for the averages in weight loss between the 4 groups, even though they're eating wildly different diets. The range from Atkins to Ornish is extreme. And the weight loss difference wasn't very much on average between the groups, but what we really saw was massive variability, so that on all 4 diets, some of the women lost 40 and 50 pounds and some gained 5 and 10.
Wow.
The within range of response to the same advice was like 50, 60 pounds. And so we said, wow, that is much more interesting than the few pounds on average that the groups differed. There must be some personal predictors, some genetic predisposition, some metabolic predisposition to this. So we designed Diet Fits to examine just 2 diets and to look specifically at a genetic predisposition or a metabolic predisposition, thinking we have some clues. We think we know why some people getting the same advice would do better versus worse. And it failed. This massive $8 million study that took 5 years of my life, the genetic predisposition factor that we had in mind did not predict variability. The metabolic difference would had to do with insulin resistance, which we really thought would help explain why some people particularly did better with low carb diets, failed. Interestingly, from A to Z to Diet Fits, what we shifted to do was, well, it was partly an A to Z, but no, A to Z, we said basically follow the book. There's popular authors who wrote these. The best way to do the diet is just the way the author said. Diet Fits was just that Diet Fits is the diet intervention examining the factors interacting with treatment success. That's what I'm very proud of our acronym. Anyway, we with just 2 diets, one of the issues that we started with and we held to was they both have to be good quality low fat and good quality low carb. And I got a very interesting comment from one of the low carbohydrate fans and fanatics toward the end of the study before we published. He said, "You did the study wrong." I said, "Oh my God, after all this time, you're telling me I did the study wrong? I've invested millions of dollars and years of my life. What did I do wrong?" And they said, "You told the people on low fat not to eat added sugar and refined grain." And I said, why is that wrong? He said, "That's what low fatters do. Added sugar and refined grain doesn't have much fat. And that causes them problems. And so compared to a low carb diet, low fat would be worse. But you took the added sugars and refined grains out. You told them to eat more vegetables, more legumes, more whole fruits." And in fact, when we found that there was no predictive value of the genetic or the metabolic factors we were looking at, our answer was that we had made them both good quality diets. And if you make them both good quality, we still get a lot of variability, but on average, they lost more than 6,500 pounds over time.
Wow, that's amazing.
So it was more, actually, we've just published a follow-up paper to Diet Fits, David. It just came out this last year where a postdoctoral research fellow who's now a physician at Stanford, who's also a cordon bleu trained chef, said, "Why don't we do an analysis of the quality? Let's look at not the low carb, low fat, but low carb, low fat in the context of quality." And quality made a difference. So you can't just call it low fat or low carb. You can't just call it vegan or keto. You have to really understand them, you should choose a good quality vegan, low carb, low fat, keto, and see what that impact is.
Right. So I know you have an ongoing series of trials now impacting dietary changes on the gut microbiome and inflammatory immune functions. In English, can you explain what those are about?
Yeah, this is so fun. So 10 years ago, I knew there was a microbiologist on campus, a world-renowned one named Justin Sonnenberg. He and his wife, Erica Sonnenberg, have this incredible lab where for years they'd been studying mice and the impact of the gut microbiome on the health of mice. And everything that seemed to work had to do with the impact of diet on the gut microbiome. So about 10 years ago, this started to be revealed that while we kind of thought the colon, the large intestine at the end of our intestinal tract, was just sort of this benign area that accumulated poop, which we eliminated, and good, we're done with it. Turns out to be a very metabolically active organ in our body and houses trillions of bacteria, all kinds of varieties of bacteria. And the Sonnenbergs have poop in their lab from traditional cultures like the Hadza in Tanzania, and they have urban culture poop, and they have found that a sign of good populations that have good long-term health tend to have quite a bit of microbial diversity. There's lots of different kinds of bacteria in the gut. And in the Western world, that variability is greatly diminished. It's like a depleted microbial diversity. And so what we have learned in the last 10 years is that fibers, from a nutritional perspective, fiber is a type of carbohydrate that we can't break down into small enough particles to absorb in the upper small intestine. So fiber, by definition, is the carbs that go to your intestine. Microbes, bacteria in your gut, eat those as fuel and thrive on them. And once they've consumed them, they make small byproducts, which we actually absorb in our large intestine. And so there's a lot of evidence to show how those absorbed byproducts of the microbiome from eating fiber have positive health effects. And that's what one of our studies showed, as well as fermented foods, which most people in the US don't eat a lot of, but historically, many cultures ate a lot of fermented food products. This is partially a storage issue when you don't have refrigeration. One way to keep the food was to ferment it. The fermented foods have microbes in them. So one term is probiotic and the other is prebiotic. Probiotics is eating live bacteria. That's eating sauerkraut, kimchi, yogurt, drinking kefir, drinking kombucha. Or prebiotics is eating fruits, whole grains, vegetables, beans. So in our study, we got people to eat more fiber or more fermented food. And we looked at the microbiome and we looked at things like inflammation in the body, and we were able to lower inflammation. So that study was published in 21 in the journal Cell. We now have a study of 132 pregnant women. They have been assigned to either more fiber, more fermented food, or both, or neither. And we're actually studying the transmission of the maternal microbiome to the infant. And I hazard to say, but it could be today, I believe, scheduled for this week anyway, the 132nd infant is scheduled to be born. So our study's done. We got 132 pregnant ladies. We got all their kids. And we have freezers full of poop and blood. And we're going to go in and we're going to look again at, what are the possible benefits of the microbes in the gut. I don't know if you've heard of moms who have C-sections who are a little worried that since their kid didn't go down the vaginal tract, never got exposed to the maternal microbiome, and they swab this cloth with vaginal juices and they rub it all over the baby. I'm sorry, baby, you didn't get my vaginal juices. Here's some. It's fascinating how far some people have taken this maternal infant transfer of microbiome, and we don't really have evidence for that, and we'll be able to study that and other things.
You're talking about the microbiome reminds me, I heard something that fascinated me. It could be complete garbage. You're the right person to debunk it if it's the case. It involved the idea that early man, pre-fire, had a tremendous need for bacteria to ward off all the disease that would come from eating the scavenged food. With fire, we started to cook our food, killed off bacteria. When we were basically infant men and we had this bacteria, we had small brains, the energy requirement was spent mostly on the bacteria.
Yeah.
When we got fire, we didn't need as much energy to be expended on bacteria, and we applied it and our brains grew, and that accounts for some of the evolution of man. Is that true?
It could be. That certainly sounds plausible. It is fascinating going back,
isn't it,
to look at that.
Yeah,
they do chew up a lot of energy that gets to them. Yeah, I mean, the world of the microbiome is probably overhyped at this point. I'm not really sure how far it will go.
Maybe in your world, I don't hear a lot about it.
It is fascinating what people think the microbiome does or could do. It's along the lines of personalized medicine or personalized nutrition. So sort of one of the goals is if we identified some missing bacteria in your gut, we could introduce it, we could feed it the right things, and some of your health conditions would be resolved. Think of all the people with gut health issues.
Yeah, oh yeah.
IBD and IBS is quite prevalent.
But most people couldn't tell you what the microbiome is or what it does. So I think you're deep into it, so it may seem like it's an issue that's bothering the public. I think most of us don't even know what it means when you have a problem with your gut. You have to ask your doctor, well, what the hell is that? So I'm happy for you, and I'm happy for me that I don't know quite as much about some of that,
Ah,
but I
okay.
appreciate that you're doing it. And I know in your free time, you're now collaborating with chefs and people in the food delivery environment to
Yeah.
figure out how to coordinate food, how food tastes with people's health and environmental sustainability and social justice in institutional food settings. This is really interesting. Universities, hospitals, work sites. I think that's fascinating. Can you talk a bit more about sort of the overview that I've explained? Because I know you're deep into it, and this is a very important area for society.
Yeah. So along this line of moving so I have a PhD in nutrition science. I understand metabolism. That doesn't mean anybody's going to change their diet.
Well, unless you talk to them.
Yeah, but still some will say, thank you for the lecture, doctor, but I like the taste of this. So then I realized, chefs are making food taste good. And I found a lot of chefs that are interested in plant-based menu item. Plant-based doesn't mean vegan. It could just be a dish that's now centering plants, but it's got some meat as a side dish or a condiment or a small portion on top. And as I started looking into that, which sounded really fun, one of the things I realized was part of the limitation of any kind of nutrition change we hope to make in the US is limited or constrained to what we grow. What do we raise and what do we grow in the US? And we raise a whole lot of beef and pork and poultry, and we don't grow a lot of vegetables.
Right.
So could we get the farmers to grow more plants and raise fewer animals, have fewer concentrated animal feeding operations and more grass-fed animals and livestock? And what I realized was, if I go to the store and say, hey, local store, I'm going to buy more of this and that, you should order more. They're likely to look at me and say, well, you're not enough to change what I'm ordering here. But what if all the universities, all the hospitals, all the food banks, all the work sites, schools started changing what they were ordering? And what happened was I found this was already happening. I found chefs in these institutional settings that were ordering less meat and more plants.
Unapologetically delicious.
Yeah. And to be fair to all the people who work in agriculture, who really many of them don't earn the wage that they deserve for the important role that they fulfill, how would you get them to shift and say, oh, please, just for the good of me, stop growing that and grow this? They need to know that there's going to be a market for what they're raising. And so if they say it's just me, they'll say no. But what if I say, oh, all of Stanford University and all of Stanford Hospital is going to buy this now instead of this other thing? I assume their interest would perk up a bit. Say, oh, I'm going to have sales of this other thing. I'm a farmer, a rancher. I want to grow food that people eat. I would like people to be healthy, but I need to make an honest living.
Sure.
So I've really thought of this institutional food setting and the unapologetically delicious plant-based orientation of some of these chefs as a solution that I would like to move forward.
Yeah, that's your stealth nutrition concept.
Yeah.
I think it's brilliant. So again, because you're bored with not having enough to do, I understand you just got a contract for a new book, which you've titled "It Depends." What can you share about that?
Okay, well, there's a good little story. So apparently no book publisher will ever allow me to say "it depends."
Really?
Yeah, they say that is the worst title ever. It
I like it.
Doesn't say anything about food. I love it. The theme of the book is "It Depends," and it depends on with what and instead of what. So when a student comes to me, been teaching human nutrition for 23 consecutive years at Stanford, and every year somebody will say, should I eat or avoid dairy? Should I eat or avoid eggs? Should I drink alcohol? Should I avoid chocolate or eat it? And my answer is always, well, it depends. Give me some context. And if I ever ask you a question on an exam and the first part of your answer is it depends, you automatically get 50% credit. And it's a joke. If I find students years later, they'll say, hello, Professor Gardner, it depends.
Yes.
But it really works. So if you say, okay,
Hello, Dr. Gardner, I'm now wearing Depends.
So put it in that context, I can almost always find you one example that's better and worse. So if you're telling me you're going to eat this thing, I don't know if it's good for you unless you tell me what you were going to eat instead, or what kind of condiments or sides you were put on it because you're eating that way.
Yeah.
So none of the book publishers like it depends. I've kind of moved to choose wisely, CHEWS, choose wisely. But now the book publisher says that not sure they like that one either. But the basis of the book is to talk about eggs or protein or GMO or organic in a way that shows, God, these are more controversial than they need to be. If you put some context around them, you will find that you're not having arguments as much as you had in the past with the people you're talking with, because you will find a common ground. And and two people can eat two different things and both be right, because part of it is their metabolism is different, and part is they have different priorities for the environment or for animal rights and welfare. And that's their job to decide on those priorities. So it's fair, and we should respect people for eating different things.
So It Depends, the book that's not going to be titled that, is about sort of people's choices and what the options are.
Yeah, it's sort of, the book is intended to be empowering and say, okay, if you just worked through this, you could feel more like you had more of a solid foundation for your choice. And if somebody challenges you on it, you just say, look, I picked for these priorities. And as I learn more, I might change again, but this is what I eat and why I eat it. And I'm standing by that till I learn something else.
Yeah, a useful tool, and I don't think I know anybody who has this ability, but you do, would be sort of a series of personal tests you could take with food to find out how your body reacts to certain categories of food. I don't think enough about that, but for example, my wife knows that certain foods make her uncomfortable. They make her bloat, or they do this, or they do that. I just plow right through. If I like the taste, I never think about what happens after it goes down my throat. But if I stop to think about that, that might be kind of smart. I haven't let that interfere, but if somebody gave me a test and said, try this, look for that, I think that'd be very valuable. And maybe we could learn some more about choices that we could make that we're not making because we're just not educated enough to understand what foods could impact us and how.
Yeah, and I would encourage everybody to do a little biohacking. So skip breakfast, include breakfast, have more grains with breakfast, have fewer grains with breakfast, eliminate eggs, add eggs. And what are the immediate metrics of interest? One is my alertness, my creativity, my energy level, my productivity. There's some things that you don't need a blood test for. I can't say that they completely line up, but I really do think that if your energy level and creativity and productivity are high, you're going to be a happy person.
Right.
That a lot of the diet that we have puts us in a sugar coma, makes us more fatigued than we need to be, causes us to delay recovery from injuries. So,
although it's interesting because, for example, I know that some people eat sugar before bed and it actually helps them go to sleep. Other people eat sugar before bed and it keeps them up, which is, again, it's an individual thing. It doesn't seem like there's a right answer.
Yeah. And that also, so I have some folks who look into this also, but they also look to see how much exercise you got in the day, how long you sleep, how regular your sleep pattern was. Did you go to the bed at the same time every night? So there's a lot of additional variables to throw in there.
Yeah.
Could be meaningful.
No doubt. So you have other clear missions still ahead of you. Can you share some of the big platform items that you're still thinking about and planning to tackle?
I have got to dissuade people of this protein myth that we need more protein and plants don't have protein. Oh my God. This is being whole food plant-based, which I prefer, but really vegetarian or vegan for 40 years now. and I am not falling over. I eat plenty of frickin' protein. And so, there's an old myth that plants are missing amino acids. And so we wrote a paper in 2019 and said, look, here's a profile of the amino acids of all the meats, all the beans, all the vegetables, whatever. All foods have all 20 amino acids. There's 9 essential ones that your body can't make, and there's 11 that are technically non-essential and your body could make, but you get them from food anyway. The 9 essential ones are all there. There's this ad I keep hearing, quinoa, the only plant food with all 9 essential amino acids. Bullticky, I'll show you a graphic from the USDA of data. All plants have all 20 amino acids. The thing is, great, they all come in different proportions, and this is in the book too. Amino acids are kind of like a Scrabble board, right? If you've ever played Scrabble, there's 100 tiles in that bag, and there's 26 letters of the alphabet, which would maybe lead you to believe there's like 4 of each letter in the Scrabble bag. But if you've played, there's only one Z, and there's only one X, and there's the whole bunch of A's and E's and R's. Amino acids are the same way. You actually need them in different proportions to meet your needs. And so what happens with plants is they're not absent or missing lysine, but the proportion is off. It's lower than optimal. And in beans, the proportion of methionine is low. But if I were to spread out this distribution of amino acid proportions of plants next to animal, and I've done this many times, your jaw would drop. It's like, holy crap, those are really very similar. In fact, are they even different? And I would point out, yeah, look, the grains are a little low in lysine and the beans are a little low in methionine. But if you eat a variety of foods in your diet, it tends to balance out, and it's easy to meet your protein needs with plant.
Is it true that mixing rice and beans is a protein?
So rice and beans have proteins just like everything else. So it turns out grains, which are a little low in lysine, are a little higher than other foods in methionine. And beans are the opposite. They're a little low in methionine, but they're a little higher than other foods in lysine. So if you mix any grain with any bean, the concept has been around for at least 50 years that you're complementing your proteins by sort of addressing some of the modest limitations by combining foods and canceling out those misproportions. Frances Moore Lappé, in her book, Diet for a Small Planet, made a big deal out of that more than 50 years ago, because her book just passed the 50-year mark. If you Google Frances Moore Lappé apologizes about complementing protein, she's since looked into it and said it's not really that important. It's only important if your overall protein intake is very low. If it is very low, that would be important. But most Americans greatly exceed their protein needs, at which case that balancing out thing kind of falls by the wayside, because there's no place to store protein. It's as soon as you've eaten all the protein to make your hair and cells and fingernails and enzymes, it all gets converted to carbs and fats because there's no place to store it. You can store a little carbohydrate, you can store a lot of fat, infinite fat actually, but you can't store protein. So all this obsession with eating extra protein, it's just getting converted to carbs and fat. It's silly.
Fascinating. A lot of information to digest. Before I let you go, I know that was another of my little
So many food puns. It's never
my low-hanging vegetable for the day.
Oh, you caught on. Thank you.
So yes, I did. So any other important facts or lessons that we should take away from the complete confusion there is out there about food?
So I'll leave you with 2, and I think these are great closing messages. Food should bring you joy and pleasure. At the end of the day, you should love what you eat, or you should at least like what you eat. And everybody deserves the dignity of getting reasonably healthy and tasty food too. So don't want to harp on any of these messages to the point where anybody's being asked to eat not good tasting food. So I really wish we would bring the joy and pleasure back and reconnect health and taste. You can definitely reconnect those moving forward. But we do have an existential crisis with climate change going on, and people really should be eating, more so than they do in America, a plant-based diet.
We don't need to clear cut any more land to grow beef and
Please stop cutting down rainforest to grow the livestock feed or graze the cattle to meet the beef taste desires of the population when there's not enough room to grow that kind of food, and it's going to be to our detriment in the long time. Not saying you have to give it all up. You just have to stop eating so much. It's much more than you need, and it's much more than the planet can bear.
Absolutely true. Dr. Gardner, thank you so much for sharing some quality time and really, I think, not just poking holes in some of the myths, but adding food for thought. Another one.
Oh, you couldn't end on a better note than that. Thank you, David.
Thank you.